J.D. Vance tried to embarrass Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett about her education, but her old law professor showed up and shocked everyone in the room. "Mr. Chairman, I think Representative Crockett should publicly share her full college grades," J.D. Vance said, his voice calm, his eyes fixed on Jasmine Crockett. "That way, voters have the right to know how well she did in school, since she makes our laws." His words hit hard, like a sudden punch in a quiet meeting. He wasn't smiling or joking. It was a serious request made during an important government meeting. The room went completely silent. Several reporters stood up and got their microphones ready. Jasmine stayed seated, not even blinking or trying to argue back. She gently closed her notebook and then looked up at J.D. She wasn't angry or tense, just calm, as if she was used to this kind of thing. Used to people questioning her based on who she was, often hiding their real feelings behind talk of political honesty. J.D. kept going, slowly. "This isn't personal, but if I, someone from a poor background, was questioned about my qualifications, then it's only fair we judge everyone the same way." A few quiet nods came from the back rows. Someone quickly wrote notes. Cameras from different news channels started moving their focus from J.D. to Jasmine, then stopped on her face, which showed no emotion, no smile, no sign that she was bothered. Nobody stopped him. Nobody stepped in. And maybe because of that, some people in the room started to agree with J.D. Only Jasmine remained still, her hands resting on the table, her eyes locked on J.D. It was as if she knew some things didn't need to be said right away, because someone else would speak for her at the perfect time and loud enough for everyone to hear. If you've ever seen someone doubted because of where they came from, leave a comment. Where are you watching this from? And if you believe that the truth doesn't need to be yelled, just spoken by the right person, hit subscribe and stay with us to hear stories that truly deserve to be told. The meeting that day wasn't shown live from the beginning. It was first a discussion by the House Committee on Education and the Workforce about fairness and access to college education and fair ways to judge students. Jasmine Crockett was invited as a special guest. She was one of the few black female lawmakers who studied law, came from public schools, and earned a full scholarship. J.D. Vance, a senator from Ohio, was there to argue against, representing a group of lawmakers who wanted to re-examine current college admission rules. They already knew each other. They had been on a CNN debate before called, "Does Success Come from Effort or Privilege?" At that time, J.D. made his point clear. "I grew up in a family with addiction problems where no one went to college," he said. "I know what it means to get through tough times." Jasmine replied simply, "And I grew up in a place where tough times weren't just a situation. They were the normal way of life. But I never used that to ask for sympathy." From that moment on, they were on opposite sides. J.D. used his past to show he deserved his success. Jasmine refused to use her past to get pity. That basic difference made them opposing symbols in debates about fairness and who deserves what. In today's meeting, the tension didn't come from their words, but from how they looked at each other. J.D. walked into the room confidently, adjusted his blue tie, and gave a small smile when he saw Jasmine already sitting. She didn't look at him, but everyone in the room could feel the strong energy between them. The people at the meeting that day represented many different groups. There were teachers, student representatives, parents from various states, and especially many political reporters. Most of these reporters hadn't paid much attention to fairness in academics until they heard Jasmine and J.D. would be there. Right from his first words, J.D. subtly planted the message he wanted to deliver. "I believe in education, but I don't believe success can be given out based on race or gender," he said. "When we change admission rules just to have more diversity, we lower quality, and that's unfair to those who truly work hard." Nobody reacted loudly, but a few people nodded in agreement. Jasmine didn't interrupt. When it was her turn, she spoke slowly. "I don't represent a race, I represent the truth," she stated, And the truth is, many people like me have had to work twice as hard just to be seen as normal. She continued, if there's unfairness, it's not in admission policies. It's in the idea that we don't belong. Neither of them said the other's name, but everyone understood. A conservative person in the front row leaned over and whispered, where did she go to law school? A young reporter quickly searched for her online and went silent when he saw that Jasmine had been a top student at the University of Texas School of Law. She had also won a National Essay Prize on Constitutional Conflicts and Civil Rights. Politico once wrote a single line about her, the woman who made the entire Judiciary Committee reopen old investigation files with a 12-minute rebuttal. In contrast, there's a little-known fact about J.D. in his final year of law school. He once asked for a break from school for personal reasons. This was allowed as a special exception. The news didn't look into it. No one questioned it because he was seen as the man who overcame poverty. And people don't closely examine stories that fit an inspiring narrative. Nothing was said out loud, but that situation made the audience quietly wonder who had been examined more closely. Jasmine sat in the middle of the room, her hands lightly resting on the table. In her hands, she only held a notebook and a blue pen. J.D. glanced at her once before the cameras started rolling. She didn't react, just gave a quiet look, sharp as a blade. A political expert leaned over and whispered to a coworker, they're not arguing, but this isn't a hearing. It's a chess match, and it looks like J.D. just made a risky move. When J.D. asked for her grades, the room was surprised. But Jasmine, as always, didn't flinch. Because some people know if you have enough truth, you don't need to shout. And even if politics can ignore the truth, intelligence cannot. J.D. Vance adjusted the microphone, his voice steady and purposefully slow, as if he was starting a part of the hearing he had planned very carefully. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, looking around the room, I'm not here to attack anyone personally. He continued, I'm here to ask a fair question. Are we trusting our lawmakers, the ones shaping the future of American education, because they truly have earned their academic success, or simply because they have a touching story? The moment he finished the question, the sound of fast typing spread through the press section. A few people in the room nodded, others frowned. J.D. didn't let the silence last. He pulled out a printed sheet and held it up. This is an anonymous post from a platform called Edalax, he said, where former students and professors share insights on the school records of public figures who attended law school. He went on, in this post, someone claiming to be a former professor questions if Representative Jasmine Crockett's school record is real, specifically asking if any special favors were made during her graduation. A murmur started from the left side of the room. Jasmine still said nothing. She simply tilted her head slightly, her eyes fixed on the paper J.D. was holding. A committee member asked, is that an official source? J.D. replied, I'm not claiming it's fully confirmed, but I do believe it's worth discussing, especially since we're here to talk about admission rules and school results. At this point, all cameras slowly moved to focus on Jasmine. She didn't smile. She didn't rush to answer. She simply turned a page in her notebook and spoke in a voice that was calm but clear enough for every microphone to pick up. Senator Vance, please make it clear, she said. What exactly do you want me to prove? A grade, a ranking, or an entire life? No one laughed. No one clapped. But the question cut sharply through the polite surface of what had been presented as a respectful debate. J.D. didn't back down. Instead, he stepped forward. If I was ever questioned about my record, he said, I was ready to share it, good or bad. He continued, but when someone avoids answering a simple question, it's often because there's something to hide. A wave of deep breaths swept through the room. Some people started to lean toward J.D.'s side. A few nodded. Some whispered, he's got a point. The split in the room became clearer. The left side leaned toward Jasmine, the right leaned toward J.D. A very experienced journalist wrote in a notebook, an academic fight hidden as fairness. Jasmine still didn't fight back. She looked up and directly at JD for the first time during the hearing, not with anger, but with enough force to stop the next sentence forming in his mouth, and then the silence stretched until a sound broke. A chair shifted as someone stood up from the audience. It was a young, thin student wearing a pale yellow guest badge. His voice wasn't loud, but it was steady and slightly shaky. "Excuse me, I'm a first-year law student. I didn't plan to speak," he said. "But if being a good student is the rule for making good laws, then why are there people with impressive degrees passing unfair laws?" The room went completely silent. Some people turned to look at him. Others turned toward JD. No one answered. No one could. That question wasn't aimed only at JD, but it shattered the one-sided push that had been in his favor. JD avoided the student's eyes. He looked down at the table and quickly tried to get back control by repeating, "I'm simply asking whether Representative Crockett is willing to be open, as I've always been." The statement no longer carried the same weight it once had. A woman in the third row, wearing a beige jacket, leaned to her friend and whispered, "That kid asked the one question no one dared to." The change wasn't dramatic. It slowly moved, in like a quiet tide, with people now starting to question JD's reasons. Not because he was wrong, but because he was too exact, too perfect, like a carefully practiced media plan. As for Jasmine, still silent, her quietness was no longer a defense. It had become a strong statement. A PBS camera slowly moved to her hand, holding a blue pen tightly. An academic expert later wrote in a comment, "That was the most powerful unspoken moment of the entire hearing." Because while people argued about grades, someone quietly proved that truly educated people know when to hold back their answers and save them for a moment that carries more importance. Just when the tension was highest, something totally unexpected happened. A government clerk walked up to the chairman's desk and whispered something. The cameras didn't catch the words, but the expression on Chairwoman Sharon Jennings's face changed from neutral to stunned. She looked up and tapped her microphone. "We've just been informed that an unregistered guest has asked to speak as an additional witness with information directly related to the question asked by Senator Vance." She paused briefly and glanced at the name. "That person is Professor William Hart, former Dean of Law at the University of Texas." The room collectively held its breath. JD turned his head. Jasmine closed her eyes, not to hide anything, but as if she had known this moment would come. JD Vance took a deep breath, getting ready to finish his speech with a carefully practiced line. "If we want our lawmakers to represent the best of our education system, then at the very least, they should show it," he said. He looked up, his eyes landing on Jasmine. But before JD could say anything more, a voice rose from the back row. It wasn't loud, but just loud enough to make the entire room stop. Everyone turned. A tall man with silver hair and a steady walk slowly came from the back of the room. He wore a long coat, held a stack of documents in his left hand, and leaned on an old carved wooden cane with his right. No one recognized him at first, until the government clerk confirmed, "Professor William Hart, former Dean of Law, University of Texas." JD froze. A quick look of surprise crossed his face, then quickly changed toward the committee staff. Jasmine didn't turn around. She simply breathed out, as if letting go of a heavy stone that had been pressing on her chest. "Professor," Hart stepped to the center of the room. He didn't need a microphone. His voice was deep, slow, and clear enough that everyone listened. "I apologize for not signing up in advance," he said. "But I'm here as someone who has taught both main figures in today's discussion, Senator Vance and Representative Crockett." He paused, carefully opened a folder, and pulled out a single sheet of paper, old and yellowed, but perfectly protected in a plastic cover. "This is not a transcript. I didn't bring that. I brought something else." He held it up. It was a copy of Jasmine Crockett's final paper, titled "Equal Under Law, Unequal in Practice, A Legal Fracture." Below her name, it said, Winner of Best Legal Essay 2013 Federal Civil Rights category. The hearing room was silent. This essay was written while Jasmine's mother was in the hospital in the final days of her life, Professor Hart explained. I know this because I was the one who approved her request to get more time. But she turned it down. He quoted her. If I can't write this while I'm in pain, then what's the point of writing law at all? A quiet sob broke from the back of the room. PBS cameras moved to a young female student wiping tears from her cheek. J.D. looked down. At the table, his hands clenched, saying nothing. Professor Hart continued, this time turning directly to J.D. I taught you too, Senator Vance, he said. I wrote the letter that allowed you to come back to the program after your family left. He added, I don't regret that, but I say this now not to make anyone look bad, but to bring fairness back to someone who has been quiet for too long. He paused. Then, with a voice as steady as a judge's hammer, he said, I taught both of you, but only one of you ever used hardship as a reason to delay. And that person was not Jasmine. No one breathed. That sentence needed no defense, no more explanation. It cut clean, drawing a line through the room, not between right and wrong, but between success earned and success simply talked about. Professor Hart said nothing more. He placed the essay on the hearing table, nodded gently to Jasmine, and turned to leave. No one clapped. No one stopped him. The air was too serious, as if any movement might break the moment. J.D. remained seated. He tried to hide his tension by clasping his hands, but the cameras caught his lips tightening, his eyes looking down for the first time that day. Jasmine still sat still. No tears, no smile. But as Professor Hart walked past, she stood, said, nothing, and bowed her head slightly. Not in thanks, but as an acknowledgement. She knew there are those who don't need to defend themselves with words, because when the truth is strong enough, someone will always rise to speak for it. The feeling in the hearing room after Professor Hart's words no longer felt like a hearing. No one spoke. No one moved. J.D. Vance sat still. His hands rested on the table, but his thumb tapped regularly against the edge of his chair. This was a repeated sign of someone trying to stay calm. Cameras moved their focus, no longer on Jasmine, but now aimed at J.D. Tiny drops of sweat started to form on his forehead. Instead of leaving right away, Professor Hart turned slightly toward the chairwoman and spoke in a low but very clear voice. I don't want to just say one line and walk away. I think I should finish the part that the media never bothers to ask about. A few people looked up. Hart nodded gently. His eyes didn't meet J.D.'s, but every word felt as if it was being carved directly onto the image of that man. In the spring semester of 2008, J.D. Vance, then a final-year law student, sent me a long email asking to put off all his exams, Professor Hart explained. In it, he said he was going through a mild depression due to family pressure. I agreed. He continued, I even told him if needed I'd write a letter supporting him taking a full semester off because I believe sometimes what someone needs is understanding, not a grade. J.D. didn't react. He tilted his head slightly downward, as if trying to hide the stress showing on his face. Professor Hart slowly turned to a second document. And this is the request form submitted by Jasmine Crockett around the same time, he said. Her mother was undergoing a third round of chemotherapy. He emphasized, she didn't ask to put off her paper. She only asked to turn it in on the day of the exam, not before the deadline. He remembered, when she handed it in, her eyes were bloodshot, but she never mentioned her mother. The cameras moved back to Jasmine. She remained silent, still, but this time her eyes were fixed on Professor Hart, not to get approval, but to silently confirm that he was telling the truth. A Republican committee member, an older congressman, shook his head slightly, then quietly said, No one ever told us this. That line, though soft, started a chain reaction. It was as if A layer of paint had been peeled back from a wall, showing the raw brick underneath. A few who had nodded with JD earlier now leaned back into their seats, quiet. Their silence was no longer about listening to JD, but about rethinking what they had never questioned. A woman in the public audience began to cry quietly. No, loud sobs, no disruption, but those around her could feel it. The woman was Marcia Reed, a former classmate of Jasmine's from their constitutional law class. She dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief and whispered loud enough for a C-SPAN cameraman to catch. She used to sit next to me every morning at 6 a.m., before the library even opened. Marcia said, I always thought she studied that, hard out of ambition. I didn't know her mother was in the hospital. Professor Hart still stood, but now his expression softened, as if he were reliving a memory he'd never shared before. Wisdom is not about where you come from, he said. It's about what you bring to others, even when you're hurting yourself. No applause, no comments. But the entire room stood still, as if someone had stopped time. A Reuters camera zoomed in on JD's face. For the first time, he could no longer hold a neutral expression. His lips were tight, eyes downcast. A small gesture, but one every live stream viewer could understand. Something inside him had broken. The shift in the room's energy was slow but powerful. A well-known journalist from the New York Times posted live, "We've listened to someone who used suffering as an excuse, but today we witnessed someone who turned suffering into purpose." Some conservative voices began to push back. One asked, if Jasmine is that capable, why wait for someone else to speak up for her? But most didn't respond, because they knew that question no longer fit the moment. At the back of the room, a young student live streaming the event put down his phone and typed a caption. "Today I learned something. Wisdom doesn't shout. It just needs the right person to tell it at the right time." In the final shot of this part of the recording, the camera slowly moved back to Jasmine. She didn't speak. She didn't say, "Thank you for defending me." She didn't show pride. She simply picked up the copy of the thesis Professor Hart had left and placed it gently in her lap. No one asked her, "Do you have anything to say?" Because no one dared to break the silence, which was heavy with the true importance of justice. No one expected a short video of Professor Hart's statement to blow up the internet and change everything. No one expected that a 3-minute, 48-second video capturing Professor William Hart's short statement would become the week's biggest game changer. Just 4 hours after the hearing, an anonymous TikTok account clipped the moment Hart said, "I taught both of them, but only one used their circumstances as an excuse to delay," putting the caption, "Who truly deserves it?" over the video. The clip got 3.2 million views in just 12 hours. Twitter, X, exploded with hashtags like "Har Not All Grades Matter," "Har Hart Said It," "Har Thee Say That Spoke," and even "Har She Didn't Need to Speak." Under each viral post, thousands of comments poured in. What shocked people wasn't just the truth about JD Vance, but the way Jasmine responded, not with arguments, not with emotional pleas, not with the usual inspiring tone. A law student at Columbia wrote, "I used to think silence was weakness. Now I understand it's the choice of someone with dignity." Mainstream news outlets reacted more slowly, but once they caught on, the split in opinions became immediate. Right-leaning network Eaglet News aired a shortened version of Hart's speech. In their edited version, the part where he said JD asked for exam delays due to depression was removed, leaving only the part praising Jasmine's hard work. This version was shown widely with a controversial headline, "Do Personal Struggles Prove Legislative Competence?" In response, dozens of users reposted the full version with captions like, "Another example. When the truth doesn't fit, they edit it." A Reddit group focused on legal ethics, RR Legal Ethics, pinned a full translation of Jasmine's thesis, explaining how she dealt with racial bias in civil trials using advanced constitutional arguments. A Harvard professor commented, "If this essay had been written by a white student at an Ivy League school, we'd have made it required reading by now." Then an unexpected witness spoke up. The account, A. Scott B., confirmed to be a conservative white former student who studied with Jasmine, posted a long Facebook message that was later shared tens of thousands of times. "In our final year, I almost failed administrative law," he wrote. "Jasmine handwrote every lecture note for me, even while her mother was dying." He added, "I never thanked her enough. I don't believe in race-based advantages, but I do believe in fairness. And fairness begins with asking who actually studied and who just tells a good story." Within 72 hours, universities from Yale and Harvard to Berkeley and Howard released statements calling for open discussions under one main idea: who are we evaluating and by what measure? A poster from Yale left a lasting impression. It showed an image of a fountain pen resting on the thesis page with the caption, "Not everyone speaks, but everyone leaves a trace." Meanwhile, J.D. Vance's office remained completely silent. No new statements, no explanations. His press team refused all interview requests, giving only one repeated answer: "The senator currently has no comment on the matter." That silence, unlike Jasmine's, was not calm. It was avoiding the issue, and the public noticed the difference. A senior NBC reporter posted on X, "Two kinds of silence. One silenced the room. The other lost all its weight." Amid the chaos, Jasmine Crockett did only one thing: no live streams, no talk show appearances, no media interviews. At exactly 7 a.m. on Tuesday, she posted a single sentence on her X account: "Not everyone in the same class learns the same lesson." No hashtag, no tags, no photo. And for that reason alone, it was shared over 1.2 million times within 2 days. The Atlantic later published a 4-page article titled "The Weight of Not Speaking." It was an analysis of why the most emotional change came from silence. A line from the article was widely quoted. Jasmine didn't argue with J.D. She didn't speak out for justice. She simply let someone else speak who was at the right moment, and then she stood still. The article concluded, that wasn't a strategy, that was power. By the end of the week, a Morning Consult poll showed that 72% of people believed academic records don't show leadership ability. 64% agreed truth should be judged by actions, not grades. Only 18% believed J.D. Vance had the right to question someone else's academic success. But perhaps the strongest reaction didn't come from numbers or hashtags. It came from a photograph. A student who attended the hearing had captured the moment Jasmine sat, notebook closed, eyes resting on the thesis Professor Hart had left her, with light from the window spilling across her hand. No expression, no triumph, just a quiet gaze. That photo became the background for essays, inspiring memes and posters put up in law libraries across the country. No caption was written on the image, but everyone understood. No one rushed to leave. The last person to rise wasn't a witness, not a lawmaker. It was a janitor quietly entering as the room held only a few lingering figures. On the hearing table, the copy of Jasmine's thesis still lay untouched, not creased, not smudged. Beside it, Professor William Hart remained standing, gently holding the edge of the paper, as if afraid that any sudden movement might break something everyone was trying to protect. Jasmine packed away her notebook. No statement, no thanks, no closing remarks like many representatives often give, because what needed to be said had been said, and what shouldn't be said had been held back at exactly the right moment. Days later, a small newspaper in the Midwest, which didn't have national readers, published an opinion piece written by a 16-year-old high school student. The author signed only as "Someone Still Learning." The piece spread quickly across different platforms, centered on a single sentence that made readers pause. "I'm not afraid of bad grades. I'm afraid of learning without knowing why I'm learning." The piece didn't mention Jasmine or J.D. Vance, but anyone who read it knew it was written after that hearing. The writing wasn't perfect, but the emotion was real, something no school curriculum could ever create. Soon after, universities from famous institutions like Princeton and Yale to community colleges in the South began trying a new, uncommon format Reverse feedback sessions. In these sessions, students could evaluate professors, not just through official forms, but in open discussions. A department head at the University of Minnesota said in an internal meeting, "For the first time in years, I realized sometimes we teach without ever asking, have our students learned anything from the way we treat them?" One photograph unexpectedly became the symbol of the entire hearing. It wasn't J.D. being caught bowing his head. It wasn't Professor Hart raising the thesis. It was the moment he stood beside Jasmine without a word. She didn't look at him. He didn't look at her. But his hand rested gently on the thesis, and hers rested on her notebook. No spotlight, no camera tricks, just two people standing together in a room that had just gone through the most important conversation of the year. That image spread quickly. No caption, no hashtags, but everyone understood. One publication reprinted it with a single line. Not everyone speaks, but someone always speaks at the right moment for those who've never been heard. Jasmine Crockett didn't appear on any talk shows afterward. No morning TV spots, no thank you essays. She simply returned to her work, writing laws, meeting with the people she represented, and occasionally posting short thoughts online. Then, exactly 1 week after the hearing, a reporter caught her leaving a closed-door meeting. She was alone, with no press team. When asked, "Do you think you won?" Jasmine paused for a few seconds, turned, smiled slightly, and said, "I wasn't there to win. I was there so someone could learn what they needed to." Soon after, The Atlantic named the moment between Jasmine and Professor Hart the political image of the year. Time magazine called it the moment silence changed the tone of a nation. And in high schools, students began talking more openly about why they learn, not just to get grades, but to understand who's judging them and why. That day, as people slowly left the hearing room, PBS cameras were still rolling. An unofficial scene, not included in the official broadcast, made its way into a behind-the-scenes video clip. Jasmine was reaching for the exit, hand on the door handle, but instead of walking out, she turned back. Light from the window fell across half her face, while behind her, the table still held the thesis. She looked at the room, now empty, and whispered almost to herself, "Sometimes you don't need a transcript to know who learned the right lesson." There were no subtitles, and the video editor chose not to add any, because it wasn't necessary. If you believe that intelligence can't be measured by unfair judgment, leave a comment below. Where did you learn your greatest life lesson? And if someone ever stood up for you, or if you ever stood up for someone else, share this, because stories like this deserve to be heard.